Let me just set up my slideshow. Which is being typically slow to open up. All right, here we go. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I too want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on Aboriginal lands, lands that were stolen and never ceded. I'm also on Wurundjeri country. And I want to acknowledge too that we live under a time of climate and ecosystem emergency, and that has impact on these lands. And that we're also in a time of high global uncertainty that impacts on many of the people that we'll be talking about today. So I'm Ian Seal, I'm the Executive Director of 3 for All Foundation, and I'll explain how that interacts with all of these other names that we're going to be throwing at you in a second. So Manu and I work together at 3 for All. Jake is a long-time friend and colleague, and was in fact our very first volunteer when 3 for All was established back in 2013. So 3 for All Foundation is an international development charity, an Australian registered charity, and we work in a range of countries around the world with a focus on supporting human rights for marginalised and disadvantaged communities. Assisting and supporting them, using our privilege to build their resources and assist them in meeting their own development aims and goals as a community. Many Coloured Sky is our LGBTQI program area, and we separate that out from our other work largely because we work in some challenging places like Uganda, where doing LGBTQI work is dangerous and difficult, and to protect ourselves and our volunteers and our partner organisations in places like that, we have some fairly distinct and separate ways of promoting our work and activity. So we are a development agency, and that means that we are not service delivery focused. Our role is around assisting LGBTQI plus communities around their goals, including service delivery of their own. And that's one of the things that's led us to this work today with queer, refugee and asylum seeker peers. Just really quickly, our priorities broadly in the queer development area are focused on LGBTQI plus children and young people, and also on refugees, asylum seekers and internally displaced people. And both of those programs have activities in Australia and international activities. And the ways we work around that capacity building for community organisations and focusing on queering the development and service delivery sectors. So our LGBTQI plus projects currently are in Kenya, Uganda, Philippines, Indonesia and PNG. And I will talk a little bit more about the Kenya project because that relates to refugees and to some of the challenges that LGBTQI plus refugees face. And you can see there that in Australia, three current program areas in our LGBTQI plus work. The one that we'll be talking about today, we have a small but growing group of international students, and we're also doing some work with LGBTQI plus young people in the out-of-home care sector here in Victoria. I just thought it was probably useful in the interests of not taking all day to try and make some assumptions about you as an audience and how we might be able to progress this. So I am assuming that you have a broad understanding of LGBTQI plus experience, and that those experiences are culturally defined and regulated and can look very different in different parts of the world and through different points in time, and that LGBTQI plus itself may not be a comfortable or useful acronym or set of discrete identities in other parts of the world. I know also that you as a group will recognise the centrality of lived experience in the work that you do, and hopefully you'll be having a sense of how we aim to make that central to all of the work we do. I do want to just say we'll touch a little bit on some areas that are challenging, so I guess a little bit of a content warning in terms of talking about some issues around trauma and violence. So our work with LGBTQI plus refugees, asylum seekers and internally displaced people, we call that Rainbow to Refuge. And as I said before, it works in Australia and internationally. The photo on the right is from a portrait exhibition that we launched in February last year, along with our peer-led plan. And I think it was 9 days later, we were in lockdown and the world looked very different. But yeah, thankfully we've been able to move forward on a range of the priorities that the group has identified that we'll talk about in a second. So just to give a bit of broad context so that Manu and Jake can then drill down to some of the issues that we see for individuals and some of the challenges they face. Sorry, that was my phone. So we know that LGBTQI plus people are overrepresented as internally displaced people, so forced to leave their communities, families, as asylum seekers and as recognised refugees. And so they have all the same reasons as other people to become asylum seekers or refugees, with the additional challenges faced by prejudice against their sexual orientation, gender identity or sex characteristics. Freezing up again. Let's do it that way. I'm only going to touch on this really, really quickly, but I'm sure most, if not all of you already know that there are very significant parts of the world where homosexual activity in particular is criminalised, and that has an overflow challenge for trans and gender diverse people, even where trans experience may not be criminalised. And it also reinforces very strong gender norms and gender stereotypes that also have a negative impact legislatively on trans and gender diverse people. We're seeing real progress in some parts of the world around LGBTQI plus rights, but sadly that's not true across large parts of the world. Of course, criminalisation isn't the only reason why people may need to flee and may seek asylum in another country. Criminalisation, but also just ignorance from governments, prejudice from governments that may not be based in law, but that still exists as a result of cultural or religious or other policies and practices, can essentially license mob violence and allow mob violence against LGBTQI plus people to go on with impunity. We see high levels of family and community violence in many parts of the world against LGBTQI plus people. And I think that's an important point in considering family violence work with LGBTQI plus refugees and asylum seekers here in Australia, is that they may have long histories across a range of very different contexts in terms of experiences of family violence and other forms of violence. Police harassment is a huge issue in many parts of the world. I hate the term. I think it's a disgusting and very loaded term, but it's the term that's used to describe sexual assault against lesbian and bisexual women in particular, is corrective rape. The idea that sexual assault will somehow reawaken a woman to the gender norms and gender expectations of their culture. We see forced psychiatric treatment, surgery, sterilisation and hormone therapy in many parts of the world still. We see forced marriages and we see extortion and blackmail. So to talk a little bit about Kenya and the role that Kenya plays in terms of LGBTQI refugee exodus. Sadly, in many parts of Eastern and Central Africa, legislation and mob violence does give people the reason and the need to flee from their home countries. Most commonly in Kenya, the queer community are Ugandans, but increasingly from other countries as well. And it's very interesting to see that, with Uganda having incredibly repressive and dangerous legislation and policies and actions, South Sudanese people often still flee into Uganda first because South Sudan is actually even more dangerous for an LGBTQI plus person. So Kenya has those old British colonial era laws. It's still far from a great place to be LGBTQI plus, but those laws are not often enforced in very rigid ways. So the standard 14-year imprisonment still exists in law, but isn't utilised. But Kenya has a very large UNHCR presence, unlike other countries in the region. So it's a portal at which someone can access third country support. Some of you will have seen, so I'll just go through it really quickly. Around half of LGBTQI plus refugees in Kenya are in very large refugee camps, most notably Kakuma, and there is ongoing and very extreme violence against LGBTQI plus community in that camp. For that reason, about half of the community have been moved into Nairobi, which is far from supportive but safer. And UNHCR have had to play a very challenging, very complicated role, and to put it bluntly, around their own reputation, as well as around safety of refugees in terms of moving and mobilising LGBTQI plus community. These are the kinds of experiences that LGBTQI plus refugees are arriving in Kenya with. I don't think I need to go into any great detail around those. They'll all be understood, but these are common experiences of those refugees as they arrive. And until such time as they're formally recognised by UNHCR, they have no material support at all to address any of these challenges, other than what some LGBT organisations, LGBT refugee organisations in Kenya are currently providing. So we partner with what's called the Refugee Coalition of East Africa. In spite of the name, they are Kenya only and they are LGBTQI plus community only. They're a fantastic group doing incredible work and led entirely by people with lived experience. So with their own challenges still of being in a country where they're not safe, that is not their own country, and looking for a final safe home. So again, in the interest of time, I won't go into a lot of detail around these, but there's a range of phenomenal activities that the Refugee Coalition does. And there on the left, you can see the kind of support that we're providing. So our model everywhere we work is a partnership model. We don't do anything unless we're asked to provide specific support. So those are the supports that we provide to the coalition at their request. So coming to Australia, Australia does recognise sexual orientation, gender identity as a valid reason for claiming protection. So some people come here as recognised refugees, but predominantly the people we're working with are people who come here, who arrive by plane seeking asylum. For some of them, it's their absolute first and primary reason for coming here, and it's the thing they do as soon as they arrive. For many others, it's something that happens once an original visa runs out. And of course, we see particularly in the international student cohort, people who on arrival in Australia or after spending some time in Australia become more aware of their LGBTQI plus identity, or kind of let it out of the box in ways that they then realise their home is no longer a safe environment for them. And so they're claiming protection some period after arriving in Australia. People who come here by detention, people who come to our group via detention generally are people who've arrived here by boat. We're doing some work around detention issues, and there are some horror stories coming from detention around the experiences of LGBTQI plus people there, including a couple who experienced extreme harassment and challenges in detention. And ultimately, when their protection claims were assessed, one was seen as having valid reasons for protection and was allowed into the Australian community, and the other was sent home. So if sexual orientation, gender identity or expression or sexual characteristics are your grounds for a protection claim, there are a range of challenges in terms of which countries you might be able to access or will accept you as a refugee. And obviously those that criminalise homosexuality won't be places that you'll be welcome to come to as a refugee. You're likely to experience violence and prejudice and isolation, both from your ethnic and cultural community, and also racism in the broader LGBTQI plus community. And I say that not as a phrase to throw out, but from the stories of many of the people that we work with. So Australia, as I said before, does recognise SOGIESC as grounds for a protection claim, but we put some terrible hurdles in the way in terms of assessment processes and make it very difficult for people to claim protection on these grounds. So many people feel forced to make a choice between their LGBTQI plus identity and their ongoing connection to family, community, and faith. And arriving here with your family as refugees doesn't mean that your family obviously will automatically accept and understand your sexual orientation and gender identity, so people can find themselves isolated from their one and only form of support and community in this country. So as part of the process of being a queer asylum seeker can be coming from a place where you've had to hide who you are, fundamentally to stay safe and to stay alive, hiding your identity, hiding everything about your experience. Coming to Australia, where you're then forced as part of the assessment process through immigration to prove that you are this very person that you've been, who's the identity of which you've been hiding up until that point in time. So proving that you are the person that you've tried to deny being. And you're often assessed against bizarre Western and Australian standards around what it means to be and to appear to be an LGBTQI plus person. And if you do get through that, then you then have the opportunity to work out who you are and to be yourself in a new country and a new culture. So our group, and Manu will talk a little bit more about this, and Jake then will go down into some detail, but visa status for LGBTQI plus asylum seekers mean that they face many barriers and many challenges. Those have been far more on show since lockdown, where people are not able to claim any form of income support from federal government, where people have spent long periods in detention and now in isolation in lockdown. So a sad and long and comprehensive list of challenges. And I do want to recognise that things like Medicare access and work rights are things that can be granted to asylum seekers, might not be granted to asylum seekers. Some have them, some don't. Some go through an assessment process and have had them and then have them taken away. Some of them don't have them and then are given them. It's a perverse and nasty system that our federal government perpetrates. So obviously there are a whole range of ways in which services can help, and I imagine that on many of these I'll be preaching to the converted if I go into any detail. But that's that first one around discretionary access. That's a really clear barrier that we see for people in accessing services if they don't have something like Medicare, and if there isn't a better reason to spend discretionary money on than ensuring access of everybody to your services, then I don't know what is. Really quickly, the model that Many Coloured Sky works on with CRASP, the Queer Refugee and Asylum Seeker Peers, is that they are at the centre of the work. It's a peer-led strategy. It's a peer-led program. We employ and support Manu in his role as a peer support worker and a community development worker, and provide both informal and formal structures to support both peer support and community development. We recognise our privilege and we leverage our privilege in terms of connections to services, connections to government, connections to funding that enable that group to access the services they need. And a part of that green circle, if you like, that says partners, is about working with organisations like Uniting to develop models that are specifically supportive of this group and to really clearly address their needs. The blue circle is a services network, so that's about we have a quarterly meeting of services. As far as we're aware, it's the only regular space where people on both sides of that intersection of asylum seeker, refugee and settlement services meet with LGBTQI plus services, along with housing, legal services and the like. And it's co-chaired by Manu, and our members are supported to come along and share their stories or just to listen in, and are also given the right to check anyone who might be interested in joining our service, either as an individual worker or as a service. And if they have had a negative experience of that service and don't want that service to be part of our collaborative work, then that's absolutely their choice to make. So we're happy to talk to people about the services network and whether that's something useful for people to get involved in. We also, in that outer circle, that consumer level circle, are providing training and capacity building to services who may not have a reason to regularly connect to us or to the community, but who nevertheless need some professional development around their work. So this model is really about ensuring that LGBTQI+ asylum seekers themselves drive their service connection and help to influence how services happen. It's about a collective wisdom from the group that they can share with services. And we know, and it's certainly been Manu's experience, that the potential to be dragged in many, many different directions and offer advice on a whole range of different committees, rather than to be seen as the centre of this work, and to lead the change and lead the advice that needs to happen into services. So that's just some of our capacity building and training work. Again, across the intersection. We have posters available that are available for download, and I'll put the link for that into the chat in a second. This is our space that Manu will talk about, that we've striven very hard to make a safe space for the group to meet and to own, to make it very much their own space. And as a final slide before I hand over to Manu, just a little bit, I guess, about the history of what got us here. We talk about this as a partnership between 3for All and Uniting Victoria Tasmania. It essentially began as a partnership between Jake and I, with a couple of gay asylum seekers who were accessing Uniting services and who were looking for help to start a group and start social activity and connection. So pre-COVID, we were running a whole range of kind of social activities and connections, and Uniting was providing casework support and material support. COVID last year challenged everything about the way all of us work. And for us, we made the decision that that's when we needed to employ a peer support worker to do that really intensive work. And we found a range of ways to ensure people could stay connected online and could get material support and access. The numbers during last year's lockdown grew from 28 to 70. And this year we're over 100 members. And I've talked a lot. I'm now going to hand over to Manu after I just show you that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. My name is Manu, and I work with Ian and Jake, as Ian said. I am an asylum seeker and identify as gay, and my pronouns are he and him. My role is peer support and community development, and I work with a group of 100 plus as of today, LGBT asylum seeker and refugees. And our group is called CRESP, and we within the group we had people from different intersections. We have a large number of trans men, trans women, gay men, and lesbian women, as well as non-binary peoples in the group. Ian, move the slides. So yeah, Queer Refugee and Asylum Seeker Peers is a peer-led program. We provided peer support and social connection to people who are currently seeking asylum in Australia and have refugee background. So our peer support activities includes social connections and material support. So this is how the model looks. We have a one-on-one support, peer support, which I provide, as well as other group members who provide peer support to their peers. We have training around building the capacity of group members. The group is run by a committee of 9 members. The committees each come from a different intersection representing the subgroups within CRESP. And the committee makes the decision on leadership and governance of the group. And also the committee makes decision on what partnerships we get out of partner organizations like Many Colored Sky or Uniting as well. In our peer support model, we have buddy system where a new member is paired with an older group member, so they could support them with peer support and other necessary support they need. We are doing material aid, mentoring for our group members as well. We have a community outreach program at the moment where we visit the other group members who are very isolated, or there's few in community detentions, that we build the capacity of group members to take on the leadership and supporting their own peers. And my role is to work with those committee members and other group members to achieve all those. Next slide. So yeah, this is some of the photos of the group and what we do. We usually do a lot of activities before COVID, but now we've reverted back to online. So we've been doing Saturday weekly catch-ups where members join on Zoom. We support them with $50 to internet data, so they could join us and have fun or just talk about the supports that they need. These are some of the photos in our space in Collingwood. It's called Base Camp. This is our planning day. We come together to talk about the services or things the group wanted to do, and then with the help of Many Colors Sky and Uniting, they help us access funding and run programs with us in the safe space that they have created. Next slide. And this is just the pantry in our base camp in Collingwood. And this is what we've been doing all throughout the lockdown, delivering food to many of our group members in the suburb. We've done over 30 houses in the last week or so, delivering food packages to them. Slide. What are the participants getting out of the group? Activities mostly. Some of the LGBT asylum seeker and refugees who come here doesn't have experiences working in Australia, so we have given them volunteer opportunities to work in the group as well, helping others. We have in the space in base camp in Collingwood where we teach them. We do conversational English classes and computer classes where group members have taken on the opportunities to help teach other group members, so they could get volunteer experience out of it. We also, the participants get out experiences of interaction and bonding, bridging, and connecting with others. It's a very valuable experience for them, as most refugee and asylum seekers who came here has lost connection, and the group has given them a perfect opportunity to build those connections and interact with others and integrate. We see ourselves as family, and we all have different experiences, and we understand and support each other with a shared experience of being LGBT and asylum seekers, this is how the group works and performs. We have a safe space in Collingwood Base Camp, as you seen earlier, where we have our activities. The members prefer to come to the space, just hang out, read a book, help each other, talk to each other, and being part of the community, and help each other when we need it. Thank you. Challenges, yes. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to services for LGBT asylum seeker and refugees. As Ian had said earlier, and Jack would highlight some as well. Some of the challenges, as for me personally, as an LGBT asylum seeker myself, and as a peer worker working with 100 plus asylum seekers and refugees is the services that we try to access living in Victoria or in Melbourne. And yeah, one of the most challenges revolving door of services where we get sent from one service to the other, and it is a nightmare for LGBT refugee and asylum seekers. Some of them have limited knowledge of the services. Some of them, yeah, do not want to go back if they are kept sending from one service to the other. We have issues of my group members who get sent from one service to the other. At the end, they did not want to access services anymore. They ended up sleeping in parks and on the streets. And it's becoming a thing where I personally walk my group members into a service and demand that they get a service before we leave. And it shouldn't be something I will be doing, but services should work around addressing those challenges. Eligibility criteria, we have many services still have those criteria where if you have certain visa types where you can't access the service, where we've seen only a few of our members can access a particular service because they come from a particular visa type and the others cannot. Expense, yes, it's very expensive for asylum seekers and refugees. Living here, as we've seen it with COVID, a lot of them with casual jobs cannot get funding or support from the federal government and the state governments. We've seen them ended up on food banks, and we've been supporting them all throughout the period. A long waiting list, I would say that is a huge issue, and we've understand as well from many services. But mostly with counseling services, we've seen members waiting up to 6 months to get counseling in particular services because they don't have Medicare and they can't access other mainstream services. The specific services that they try to get have long waiting lists, and within that time, the group tries to hold back their friends while they waiting for the services that they try to access, especially counseling or psychological support. Racism, homophobia, and transphobia, yes, it is one of the challenges I've come across as well as my group members that we talked about mostly, and we've seen in workplaces where LGBT asylum seekers and refugees who get discriminated, and they do not want to report that because they think it will be affected on their immigration interviews. So it will have impact on the visa statuses where it leaves them on not knowing when to report something if they ended up in a situation. So it always leaves them in bad situations. Poor discriminatory and heteronormative assessment process. Yes, we've identified some of the challenges, those challenges, and the group has worked towards advocacy with services as well, and making those assessment process welcoming for our members, and some of that has worked well with most of the services in Melbourne. Feeling unsafe in asylum seeker services or in workplaces is another one, a very huge challenge for our LGBT members. Going to asylum seeker services for them is going back to see people from their own ethnic groups and seeing other asylum seekers who still have limited knowledge of understanding LGBT peoples. And this is a great impact on LGBT people accessing asylum seeker services, because this LGBT people in my group thinks the services are not that safer for them, and they sometimes find themselves being not treated fairly by workers in those asylum seeker services that they try to access. awareness. There is little awareness still in the community. The group is working as a collaborative effort with organizations on bringing awareness towards making the services more inclusive and safer for our LGBT asylum seeker and refugee members. Thank you, Ian. And I don't have time, but this is a video of the group members make. It's called, we submitted the video to the Better Together conference in June in Adelaide, and it is an interview with some group members on the experiences they get out of our peer support group, and what are some of the challenges that they face accessing services around in Australia, around in Victoria. This is the link. Yeah, you can watch it at your own time. Yeah, that's it, Ian. And thank you.
Thanks, Manu. Hand over to Jake.
There we go. Can everyone see that? Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners. I'm on Wurundjeri country today. Yeah, acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded and always was, always will be for Aboriginal land. Yeah, my name's Jake. I work at Uniting within the asylum seeker programs. So I'll just provide a quick whiz over Uniting. I guess a lot of people would be aware we're a pretty big organisation, have presence right across Victoria and Tasmania, working in lots of different areas, including family services and family violence. And there's probably some Uniting people in the audience today as well. Yeah, so doing a lot of work with victim survivors as well as behaviour change work. So there's a link there to services, or if you'd like to be passed on to relevant people as well within Uniting, more than happy to be contacted around that. Also just wanted to say that there's a really concerted effort within Uniting to improve cultural safety and diversity and inclusion in the LGBTQI+ space. And at the moment that is really being led by Kate Bradshaw, quite tirelessly, I have to say. But yeah, there's a lot of work generally being done across a whole range of different programs and including our LGBTQI+ specialist programs as well. So that's really good, and that's filtering down to how people experience our services and how they access our services, as well as the experience for staff and volunteers as well. So I will just provide a bit of information about our general mainstream asylum seeker programs. So we've got the Asylum Seeker Welcome Centre based in Brunswick. So it works like a bit like a neighbourhood house, community development model, drop-in centre kind of thing. Obviously not really a drop-in centre at the moment. The staff that do such a wide range of work around information referrals, some sort of brief intervention casework and support as well. There's usually classes and workshops and things going on there as well, where possible some of that stuff has been translated into the online platforms. But at the moment the real focus is around food distribution, emergency relief. So staff are doing a really good job of managing that in difficult times, like a lot of us are. Yeah, so if you're working with anyone on bridging visas, temporary protection visas, safe haven enterprise visas, this is a really good point of support for them, and sort of all forms of referrals, soft referrals, self-referrals, and whatever are accepted. So I primarily work within the Asylum Seeker Project as a caseworker. We're located just up the road, also in Brunswick, from the Welcome Centre. So we're a housing and casework service. We manage a few properties and we provide intensive casework support to the people that we house. Generally, the people that we're working with have no income. So that may be because they don't have work rights, or there's significant barriers to working, like physical or mental health kind of concerns. So generally we're working with people at the real pointy end in terms of vulnerability and complexity. We run a couple of specialist programs, for the Rainbow program, as we'll talk about now, as well as a really great women's program, which is coordinated by Tita, who's here today as well. We don't have a wait list necessarily. We just don't have enough turnover or vacancies coming up. You know, we're all fully aware that the homelessness sector is in crisis. It has been for some time. So at this intersection, it's another level of crisis. So we certainly can't meet the demand. But if you're seeing people who are seeking asylum that are in need of housing or facing homelessness crisis, you can get in contact, and maybe we'll be able to let you know when we have vacancies come up, or perhaps provide you that secondary consult support. Really happy to do that. So to talk a bit about what we call the Asylum Seeker Rainbow program. So out of the work that Ian and Manu kind of outlined, the work that Uniting and Many Coloured Sky and the Referral Foundation did together, as CRASP kind of emerged and strengthened, especially over the last sort of 12 months, Uniting, we kind of really took some natural steps back, I guess, from that day-to-day coordinating and logistics kind of work that Manu talked about, and kind of really fell into the model that Ian was talking about with CRASP at the centre and services kind of linking into them around. So that was a very natural and organic kind of process, and it's a success story I do like to talk about, because it's, I'm sure many people are aware, it's not necessarily, we're not always hearing these kinds of success stories in community development, capacity building space, so especially not in this kind of short period of time. So I think I'm really proud of the work that we've done across our organisations to make it happen. So that, yeah, it's really, really cool to reflect on. But we do continue to work really closely with CRASP and Many Coloured Sky. I work really closely with Manu on a day-to-day basis, and a few of my colleagues, and also providing that support to Manu and the peer committee when they request it and when they need it, so that communication is always there. I guess what we've really done is come back to focus on where our strengths lie. And that's really around that specialist complex casework support. And there is a really big gap there. So many of the people within CRAFT aren't getting that kind of support. And also around providing material aid, emergency relief and food aid as well, especially during COVID and lockdowns. And yeah, I guess, like really trying to work closely with Manu and the peer group and the committee to kind of to fill the gap in a way that is really productive. And I guess the acknowledgement that obviously at the centre of everything that is done, the people with lived experience and the peers should be at that centre. But at the end of the day, services like Uniting and like many of the services that you're representing today really have to step up to the plate and carry some of that load sometimes. Obviously always in partnership with those with lived experience, but that work needs to be done and that load needs to be carried by organisations like ours. Another thing that we've really tried to focus on is, we're a housing program, and I said there's some serious limitations around our program as it is, around housing stock and that kind of thing, but we're really trying to put in place strategies to prioritise some of the really more vulnerable groups like trans and gender diverse folk. We know generally safe, secure housing is difficult. Again, at this intersection, it's sort of potentially compounded. So I'm really trying to make some changes around that. And generally, as Ian mentioned, around the Queer Refugee and Asylum Seeker Services Network, we co-chair that with Many Coloured Sky, uniting co-chairs that. So that's coming from the recognition that, as Ian said, that the queer sector and the Asylum Seeker Services Sector Network need to come together and fill the gap. And doing training presentations, always happy to have secondary consults and that kind of thing. There's work being done within Uniting, and there's a lot of support to formalise and expand this work and have it funded. It's not funded at the moment, so a bit of a watch the space kind of thing, because there's a lot of work being done there. Just quickly, we thought we'd share a bit of a story to round things out and highlight some of the work we do, especially in the family violence, some of the work we've done in the family violence space, I guess. Just to provide a bit of an idea of what some of the people that we work with experience. Maybe there's not going to be a lot that's new for a lot of people in this group today, but it's a pretty good example to provide. And I think, as both Ian and Manu said, it's pretty safe to say that a vast majority of our members have experienced some form of family violence or family of origin violence in their lifetimes, or it's ongoing. They're just stories that we hear all the time. And so that was really kind of generous to share his story today. And what he was kind of really wanting to convey and highlight was where he fell through a gap or almost fell through the gap, and he just kind of wanted services and people here today to really understand that. So Sabat, yes, male identified, in his 20s from Afghanistan, only arrived in Australia shortly before lockdown with his mum, older brother and younger siblings. So obviously those kind of really common themes of isolation were compounded by that new arrival experience as well. Not able to meet new people, not able to engage in English as he wanted to do or look for work or anything like that. So during that time, controlling behaviour and physical, emotional violence from his older brother worsened, and specifically in relation to his sexuality and kind of suspicion around his actions and that kind of thing. So by the time he was referred to us, he had been living in a really high-risk environment for a prolonged period of time. Kind of undetected, I guess, or without coming into contact with a service that could support him. He did have a settlement services caseworker, and that person, the caseworker of the service, was aware of what was going on. The problem, one issue here is that generally caseworkers are allocated per family and not per individual. So that's obviously practical in a lot of senses, but that raises a lot of issues as well. Around conflicts of interest and information sharing and privacy confidentiality and all sorts of stuff in this kind of context. But what became really clear when we really started to unpack what was going on was that there was real limited knowledge generally of family violence coming from these supports, especially within the queer context. And this is probably stuff that isn't new to anyone. We know about these gaps often in mainstream services. Really limited knowledge of referral pathways as well to queer specialist services, or what was available in LGBTQI plus specialist services. And I think also just a fundamental misunderstanding of family violence and what family of origin violence is, and does that constitute family violence, or how family violence in the LGBTQI plus space or with that lens it kind of manifests. So a whole bunch of concerns there. We were able to advocate for a new caseworker to be allocated, so that I had his own caseworker. Then there were unfortunately some issues with communications and perhaps limited understanding again of risk level and what was kind of at stake. And that resulted in his brother, the perpetrator, almost being alerted to Sadat's exit plan. So obviously a really big scare there for everyone involved, not to say the least for Sadat himself. And there was also, some just inappropriate sort of referrals that were made, for a new GP that wasn't the same GP as his family, but the settlement service just automatically referred him to a GP with an Afghan background, and unfortunately that person was was very homophobic and very critical of Sadat's choice to leave violent situations. So, and he experienced quite a lot of shame from that experience as well. Once he was linked with us, with Harassment, with the Rainbow program, you know, things moved really quickly. We had great support from Thorn Harbour Health and the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, which shout out to you folks. And that really, I think, empowered him to leave the violent, you know, to leave that situation that he was in. Obviously, we all know it's not as easy as that, and that he continues to struggle with a whole range of things related to this every day, but he was at least able to make himself physically safe at that time, as safe as possible. I think this situation highlights a few things, going back to what Manu talked about, just that sheer importance of the peer support and the importance, as we all know, of chosen family, in the LGBTQI+ space. We've got a couple of people, we often hear craft described as a big queer family, which is really nice. I think it goes to what we have seen many times, which is that disconnect between mainstream and specialist services more generally, but definitely, as we've all highlighted, which is that disconnect between the LGBTQI+ sector and the asylum seeker services sector as well. And that has been a main concern, as Manu was talking about as well, has been articulated by cast members from the very beginning of all this work. And it's been a key objective of ours from the beginning to really address that disconnect and sort of try to provide some kind of bridge between that gap or a safety net to support people, and really specialise and tailor that support for individuals as well. Okay, I don't know, Ian or Manu, if you want to talk to that at all anymore, or if you want to add something before we see if anyone has any questions.
Perhaps only that, the collaborative model that we're talking about here that puts the group at the centre is one that only works when there's a commitment to community and a particular way of working together. It's a slow process. It's a building process, and it's about gaining trust and working together. And we're always very keen to see how we can grow that network and that sense of community for the peer group, provided, as I say, that the peer group themselves are comfortable with that idea of who might be joining and how to grow things. And the other thing I just wanted to say really quickly is Manu started with a job where we had 28 people for him to support, and now we've got more than 100. And he's absolutely phenomenal at doing that, but we are currently seeking funding to have a second and other gendered worker to work alongside Manu. Thanks.